Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I leave the coffee shop and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is Tuesday, April 23rd, and I am walking home on a gloomy suburban Chicago day. The weather is cool, I would say mid-50s, high 50s, something like that. And I am reflecting on the journey I just took to Washington D.C. for an academic conference. It was a fun time. I got to hear a couple papers about board games, although honestly nothing that was too amazing. Some interesting stuff. A really good paper about the history of wargaming up to Dungeons & Dragons. And the way that Dungeons & Dragons was informed by wargaming, and the way that, according to this guy, all tabletop games since then were informed by Dungeons & Dragons. I think that seems like a bit of a stretch, but okay. A couple other interesting papers that I heard. I also got the opportunity to do a little bit of gaming, so I'm going to do a couple shooting from the hip episodes. This is actually a triple shot, shooting from the hip triple shot, which makes sense because I'm walking home from a coffee shop. Before I go into that too much more, I did get an opportunity to play Carpe Diem again, which was really fun, although I lost terribly. I got 4th out of 4 people. I got to play Monikers, although we didn't actually have a set of Monikers, so we just played the folk game charades, or folk game celebrities, which you basically play. It is like Monikers. Or I should say, Monikers is an adaptation of the folk game Celebrity. What else? I also ran a couple games of 2 Rooms and a Boom, which was fun, but we only had 12 people playing, so that game really shines at 20. So at 12, it's a little bit undercooked, let's say. But I did get to play a couple games that I hadn't played before, and each of them I've only played once. So I'm going to do a quick discussion of those games and a sort of instinctual gut shot, a shooting from the hip, as they say. And it's a triple shot, both because I'm coming home from the coffee shop, so it's as if I'm had 3 shots of espresso perhaps, but also because I'm going to do that for 3 games. So, 2 of these games I got to play at Labyrinth Games in Washington, D.C. Thanks to Philip Millman, a regular commenter on Board Game Geek, for suggesting the Monday night game night at Labyrinth. That was wonderful. So, the 3 games. The first game that I got to play was Oceans. And I want to be clear, Oceans is on Kickstarter right now from North Star Games, and I think it is still a little bit in refinement, so it's possible that some of my experience does not accurately reflect the final product, although it seemed pretty much done. They were still tweaking things here and there. Particularly the event deck was not properly seeded, so we did not have the events come up as the different domains of the ocean emptied out. So Oceans is a new game in the same line as Evolution from North Star Games. I have not played Evolution, so I'm unable to comment on the differences between the two. But in the game, you have a bunch of trait cards in hand, and you play the trait cards to the board to create species, which you then have to keep fed. And each round you get to have one of your species take a feeding action, and if you successfully, and then all of your species age and you score points from those species. If when you go to age you don't have any fish left in your species card, then your species goes extinct and you lose. Apparently this is the big difference, or according to the guy from North Star, this is the big difference between Oceans and Evolution, or one of them is that in Evolution, if you ever run out of the population, whatever it is, your species is extinct immediately. In Oceans, you can run out, You just need to make sure that during your turn, you then manage to get food back onto that card so that during the aging part, you have a token to give up. So that's kind of the difference. It was a really interesting game, fun. I don't think it'll probably make its way into my collection because at the core of it is player versus player attacking, and that isn't really the kind of gameplay that my family enjoys very much. The art is beautiful in the game, and the components are nice. As I said, I was playing a prototype, so they weren't finished components certainly, but it was a fun game, and I certainly would recommend trying it out if you enjoy the Evolution line. I imagine it's slightly different, but more of the same, and amusing nonetheless. I did like the narrative component of, as you are adding features to your species, you are then creating a story, and that story then helps you understand what your species is and how it works. So you put more and more predator cards on your thing. You're making a bigger and bigger predator, and you make a predator that eats things and then has tentacles. Now you've got some sort of big octopus monster, and yeah, it was fun to kind of think about the different ways that your species emerges. Yeah, so that was Oceans from North Star Games in prototype form. It's on Kickstarter right now, I believe, for a little while yet. It may have just finished, but I'm sure there's a way you can jump in the Pledge Manager. The next game I want to talk about is a new game from AEG called Tiny Towns. It's a really interesting little strategy game by which you are building a town, and you build the town by taking resource cubes and placing them on your grid. You have a little 4x4 grid, 16 squares, and when you take a cube, you place it on the grid and you arrange it so that you're putting the cubes on the grid in a pattern. When you've completed the pattern, you can then build a building, which involves taking all the cubes from that pattern off the building or off your card and replacing it with one of the little buildings. The crucial thing is that the buildings, if you can't build a building, then those cubes stay on there and they kind of clog up your board and they get in the way of other things. The game ends once everyone's board is full, and the winner is determined by the way that you've scored the different buildings. So some buildings will score points when they're next to other buildings of a different type. Some buildings don't want to be near other buildings and that sort of thing. The scoring reminded me of Between Two Cities, if you've played that. It was a really fun game, not too long. Plays 6 people without much delay over, say, the way it would play with 2 or 3 people. Thinky, I was terrible at it. I did very poorly, but I had a lot of fun. Definitely a game I would like to play again. I'm not sure, it doesn't go on my immediately I want to purchase it list, but it certainly is a game of interest. So I'm excited to see that come out. It also, I really like the variety of buildings they have. So the game comes with 6 different building shapes, but more than 6 cards. I think 18 cards or maybe 24 cards. And each card gives you a different kind of building for one of the colors. So there's like an orange church style building, and you have to pick one of the orange church style building cards to put out, but each one scores a different way. So the game should have a lot of variety as you put out different combinations of these cards. And I'm saying that was my impression. I didn't actually look through I know there's at least more than one option, but I didn't look through the components myself to see how many different varieties there are, or whether you have to play them in sets, or whether you can mix and match. So, but definitely worth checking out. That's Tiny Towns from AEG, coming out in May. So the third game I wanted to offer my initial impressions of was K2. Now K2 is an older game. It's been out for a while. I think 2012 was the original date. But it's been out of print for a long time, and it just came back in print. This is a game I've been looking at for a while. I really like the idea of it, and it's pretty accessible as a mid-weight family game in the 45-minute range to an hour range. The idea of the game is that you are leading expedition of a pair of climbers up the mountain K2, which is the second tallest mountain in the world. Your goal is to get your climbers as high as you can and then help them survive the whole 18 turns on the mountain. There are these weather cards that shape your survival, and these movement cards that let you move up and down the mountain. It's relatively simple, actually, as a explanation. Like, teaching people to play is not too hard, and there are interesting decisions to make throughout. The game comes with a little bit of variety because the board is two-sided. There's an easier side and a harder side, and then there are two different sets of weather cards as well that are randomized. So you can play on the easy side with the easy weather, easy side with hard weather, hard side with easy weather, or hard and hard. So that gives you some variety as well. I know that there are a couple expansions, so if this game takes with my family, I'll probably be looking to get Broad Peak or Everest, which are two sort of follow-ups to the game, give you more chances to play and more variety and so on. But as an initial game, sort of mid-light, difficult game, K2 seems like an interesting one. I got to play it one time solo, and I helped run a game where we actually had 6 players other than myself, so I kind of moderated the game, which was nice because they were all new to it. Or maybe it's 5. I think it plays up to 5. So there were 6 of us all together. So I kind of ran the game but didn't play. But it was fun to watch the decisions that people were making, see whether some people tried to go slow and steady, some people tried to rush to the top. There's interesting strategies all along, and the varying elements of the weather really make for some intriguing choices to be made throughout. So overall, my first impressions of K2 are pretty solid. I'm looking forward to exploring the game a bit more. So what have you had on your table lately? What's new in your gaming life? Pop over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let us know what you've been playing. What are your first impressions of interesting games? Well, that's about it for me. So I appreciate you joining me on this shooting from the hip triple shot. And until next time, I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. I just saw a hilarious little smart car covered in ads. Reminded me of the old Simpsons where Nelson laughs at a guy who's very tall in a small car. He says, "This is the biggest automobile I can afford. Am I, therefore, deserve to be the subject of humor?" Something like that. We'll cut all that, I think.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.